Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the Warbonds channel. If you don't know me, my name is Eric. I'm a locomotive engineer by profession, an avid model railroader, and a lifelong rail enthusiast. As you can tell behind me, there are railroad tracks, and yes, I am on railroad property. I go on duty in about 10 minutes, and our assignment today is to deadhead into Iowa somewhere to relieve a train and bring it back into our home terminal here in Nebraska. But I figured I'd take a few minutes to talk to you before I go on duty to get started on video podcast number 2 of building a 1-inch scale Santa Fe GP60M. Since our last video, there's been a few developments that have changed the course of the project, and these aren't necessarily bad things. When we did the walk around in part 1, it was about 100 degrees outside, and I was getting warm, and my phone actually shut down on me because it was overheating. I went inside, cooled down, got the phone cooled down, came back, and continued recording. Upon finishing, I touched the locomotive as I was putting it away and realized, ooh, this is pretty hot to the touch. So that really told me a lot. And one of the things I did say in that video is that on a daily basis, everything changes. And sometimes it's even on an hourly basis that things change. But one of the things that I realized is that I told you that I had styrene parts that I was going to be using. One was for the traction motor blower housing, and the other was for the exhaust stack. I realized if that locomotive was that hot to the touch on that extreme day, in the extreme heat of that day, there's no way that those parts are going to hold up in the long term. So that was actually a good thing that prevents me from getting this locomotive all finished up with these inferior parts, only to find that they warp, and then after I've finished this product, I have to take everything apart and repaint and replace it with parts that I should have put on there in the first place. So this is actually a good lesson for me to realize that, okay, there's a different way that I need to do this. Now, one of the things to look at is I've got these parts, I tried to put them on this locomotive, so does that mean that it was a total waste of time? No, absolutely not. Because between some of these parts that I know that are not going to work and a few other things that I've done, these things I consider mock-ups. Because even though they won't go on the actual finished product itself, they give me an idea of what I'm working with. I have something physical in my hands that shows me the measurements, the angles, and everything that I need to know when it comes to making the actual parts that are going to be the superior parts that I can put on the locomotive that will last. Another good thing that happened is that a good friend of mine reached out to me, and we were talking, and I was doing some brainstorming and giving him some ideas about things that I wanted to do. Now, in some ways, my ideas weren't the greatest, but he actually said, well, I understand what you're trying to do, and I could probably help you out with some of the things that you want to accomplish on this. And the biggest thing is trying to make good-looking detail parts for when we finish this locomotive. I want this thing to look as good as possible. And he has actually done some 3D printing and has more knowledge about welding certain parts and different things that I don't have that he's willing to help me out with. I said, hey, this is great. And we talked so much that I said, you know what, I really need to come see you. The unfortunate part is he lives 11 hours away from me. So it may not be until November until I get to see him. So it's going to mean that things are going to be a little slow going, but I do have a number of things that can be done between now and then. But this is where patience comes in, because as long as I'm patient, this means that instead of settling and cutting corners, we're going to be able to make the best parts possible and do the best procedures possible in order to make a really good model. I had done a wood fuel tank, and I showed you that in the walk around. I did it because I was trying to make a mock-up because I wanted something physical in my hands to see. How is this going to fit underneath this locomotive? How is it all going to come together? I needed that physical mock-up to give me an idea of what the finished product is going to look like when we have it attached underneath the locomotive. It came out well enough that initially I thought about just using that as the fuel tank, but unfortunately, because it is wood, there are some limitations with trying to use that. So therefore, I just decided that this is just going to be a mock-up because I want to do this as well as I can. And my friend that reached out to me is willing to help me in actually fabricating a steel tank the way I want it. However, in this video, we're still going to talk fuel tank because I want to take that mock-up. I want to show you what I've done with it and how that's going to relate to the overall product when it's finished. Now, mock-ups have been an important part of designs and manufacturing for many, many years. Take, for instance, the aviation industry. Let's say when Boeing decided that they wanted to build, a Boeing 747. Well, what did they do? They actually made a mock-up. They made a scale model of the aircraft based off of the drawings and the designs that they came up with. They had something physical that they could look at and something physical that they could test. They would put it in wind tunnels and have the wind blowing at it as if it's in flight, so they can tell, okay, the wings that we design here, how well do they generate the lift, and all those important things. Well, even though we're not getting that extensive with my model, but still, I have something physical in my hands that I can look at and I can size up to say, hey, is this going to work for the model? In this video, we're going to talk about the fuel tank. Now, from the very beginning, as I started seeing parts being fabricated for this model, the fuel tank was just one of those pieces that I was excited to see because it just has so much detail and it adds so much to the overall aesthetic look of a locomotive. Now, Will and I had talked about it numerous times that how are we going to go about fabricating a fuel tank? Unfortunately, with every part that is made and fabricated for this locomotive, it has to be created in a CAD program. This way, the information can be fed to the proper machinery to actually have those parts cut out. With the fuel tank, there's so many angles, contours, and just enough that makes it more difficult. So this was one of those parts of the project that we kept putting off. However, when I got the locomotive to my house, I decided that I wanted to try to do something to figure out some kind of an idea as to how I was going to come up with the fuel tank. Now, primarily a lot of models that I've built in the past are all made out of wood. I like to use poplar wood because it's a very hard wood, and if the model gets bombed or something hits it, that wood is not going to gouge as easily as a softwood like pine. So I took some poplar wood. I'm thinking I'm going to try this even if it's wrong. And I just made some different cuts and angles and everything, and ended up coming out with a halfway decent looking fuel tank out of poplar wood. Now, even though this model is supposed to be a steel model, but I've said from the beginning, I do things untraditionally sometimes, and sometimes untraditional is the only way that you can make something happen, or at least untraditional is the start in making something happen the way you eventually want it. But for wood, this actually came out pretty good. Now, I mentioned before that I was apologetic that I didn't do a bunch of in-progress type of photos to kind of give you an idea what I did. However, even just with what I have here and a few other things, I think I can show you what I've done. This is an O-scale fuel tank, and I have a ruler here. That's a scale ruler that shows measurements, scale measurements for O-scale, HO scale, and for N scale. So since we have an O-scale fuel tank here, we're going to take the O-scale measurements. So I'm going to grab the fuel tank, okay, and we're going to start at 0. And we end up at 16, if you can see that, okay? So that means that we have a 16-foot long fuel tank. Now, if we go to the width, okay, we're going to put our 0 there on the very edge. And when we look at the other end, we're at 10, okay? So that means that the basic measurement for our fuel tank is going to be 16 feet long by 10 feet wide. Now, with a 1-inch scale model, that means 16 inches long and 10 inches wide. Okay, so as we look at the fuel tank here, just in the state that it's in right now, I've done quite a bit of sanding to it, so it doesn't look terribly bad, but here are some areas that I had to put a lot of glue in because I had a glue joint come apart on me because I started sanding it too soon after I started putting things together. But if we just look on the inside here, you can see all the little individual pieces that I had to wood glue together in order to get the length. And so that's what's been done on both sides. Now, of course, the end pieces are actually solid pieces, and all the angles were cut in a miter saw. And then I actually used my bandsaw to try to cut the curves to get that part of the fuel tank. But also, this was a template that I was using. So this is actually how I was getting a lot of my angles and stuff. So it's not that I'm some major genius that, I'm a physics major and I know this stuff like the back of my hand. Okay, so now looking at the bottom side of the fuel tank, okay, we definitely see that it's hollow. Okay, so the reason that it's hollow is because I was going to come along later with a piece of wood cut down to a snug fit to become the bottom, okay? And of course, it's probably not going to go in for me, but okay, but you get the idea. Anyway, however, I'm not done yet because I need some holes in this. So let's do this. Zip, zip, and bam, we have a couple holes. Now, if you're wondering why I'm putting those holes, probably some of you have already figured out that I'm actually putting a speaker system in there. Okay, so I finally got this piece in there to show you the example here. So now the bottom is in snug. I've got the 2 holes here. So if we actually turn it over, so basically what's going to happen is we're going to take a pair of speakers. Put one right there. And the other right there. Now, I'm doing this actually for 2 reasons, because by doing it this way, I've created a designated opening in order to get the sound to come out. Plus, it's going to bounce off of the ground, which is going to help in amplifying the sound. But then being enclosed in this fuel tank is also going to make it a little bit louder as well. Now, the reason other than that is that if you saw in the last video where we have the 4 12-volt batteries inside underneath the long hood of the locomotive, there's not going to be much room to put those speakers in there. And the more stuff you start cramming in there, the more problems that you're going to have. You're going to have maybe metal touching a circuit board or something that's going to short out and that could ultimately fry the board. Okay, so before we add the bottom in here, there's still plenty of sanding that needs to be done here. So we're going to take a little bit of time here to get some sanding done. And one of the things that I have found to prolong my health is to actually wear a mask, because you do get a significant amount of sawdust that you do breathe in. So I always try to wear a mask when I'm doing a lot of sanding or I'm doing a great deal of cutting. Well, that's basically it for video number 2 of our video podcast series called Building a 1-inch scale Santa Fe GP60M locomotive. I did more talking in this video than I did showing visuals, but everything is a building block, and sometimes a little more talking is required to explain the procedures of everything that's going on. But nonetheless, I hope you've enjoyed it. And once again, this will be a building block as we go into video number 3 and talk about some more mock-ups. In video number 3, I intend to talk about the cab, which is behind me, and maybe talk about doing a cab interior. So I have some ideas for that, but I hope you'll stay tuned, and I hope your interest keeps up in everything that we're doing to complete this locomotive. Thanks a lot. Once again, my name is Eric. I hope you have a nice day, and please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.